All right. Essentially, we're continuing on with the kind of sort of lengthy note taking reading that I handed out yesterday. Yesterday, we introduced chapter 23 of the O.G. Amsco book. It was over the Ottoman Empire, Qing Dynasty in Japan. And, whereas last week we talked about, the process of these nations industrializing and all the changes it caused. Now we're looking at some places that were behind, Europe and the United States. Places that either were much slower to industrialize or really didn't industrialize at all, at least for a while. Japan did, but their story is kind of unique. Today, we are briefly going to kind of run through the Ottoman Empire material real quick. If I go over anything that you did not get in your notes yesterday, you may want to jot that down. There's definitely some points of emphasis I want to go over. And then I'm going to give you the remainder of class to hopefully finish your notes over China, over Japan. Remember, if it's got a dash, pretty much the definition is good. But if there's something in parentheses, just, obviously do what it's asking for. It's usually causes and effects, especially in this part. Actually, it's all causes and effects of, various conflicts and events in history you need to know about. Tomorrow we'll go over Qing Dynasty in Japan. Got some cool video clips lined up. We'll kind of discuss and walk our way through a lot of this key information you need to know. On Thursday, we're going to talk about the LEQ essay. We'll go over the rubric, maybe look at some samples, try to point you in the right direction to get ready for Friday when we do have our first test grid of the 6 weeks, your essay over the Industrial Revolution. It'll be, a class period. You'll write it in class. It's a 50-minute time limit, but more on the essay a little bit later on. Other news and notes, other than the notebook, which was due last Friday, everything else that we've assigned this 6 weeks is going to close this Friday. So if you're missing some things, please get those in. If you finish your notes early today, by all means, maybe use that time to get some of the stuff done that you're missing. Also, we've got another extra credit quiz in AP Classroom, the Unit 5 progress check. It's kind of long, 27 questions. You'll have a 30-minute time limit. If you can get the quiz done within the time limit, I will give you half a point for every question you get correct. I'll round up if necessary. But that's one of the things that you could do to help you out and also just kind of practice dealing with time limits. So let's go ahead and talk a bit about the Ottoman Empire. The things that you needed in your notes were Muhammad Ali. What were some good things he did? What were some bad things? Again, this is not the boxer. You needed to summarize Tanzimat. Within the book, there were all these different changes that came with Tanzimat. You were supposed to kind of, go over some of those. Loss of territory, what areas did they lose? Why? During this broad time period of industrialization, mainly, for them, we're talking 1800s and the 1900s, Ottoman Empire shrank quite a bit. Why did that happen? Where did it happen? And then some key, just really basic vocab, extraterritoriality, what was it all about? So this is the Ottoman Empire as you get into the 20th century. By the time of 1914, anybody know why 1914 is important? When World War I started. By the time of 1914, really we're just looking at this area in the Middle East, surrounding Turkey, some of the Arabian Peninsula. That's pretty much it, because at that point they had lost a lot of this other territory in North Africa, a lot of it in the Balkans here, in the southeastern part of Europe. They had already lost prior to this time period, prior, I guess, to 1878. They had already lost Greece and Serbia and Albania. Well, it just seemed like the losses just kept continuing going into the 20th century. The Ottoman Empire, started off really big. They grew really fast. This is going back to the mid-1400s. But they didn't modernize at the same level of their European neighbors. While the Europeans, in the West were going through the Enlightenment, all this new thought about how things should be ran and the rights that people have, and eventually going through, the Industrial Revolution, the Ottoman Empire was starting to stagnate. Okay, and even though you read that they do eventually industrialize to a limited extent, and they do launch a bunch of reforms, you've always got kind of this conflict within the Ottoman Empire between those that want to modernize and those that really want to stick to their traditional ways of life. So the first person we're going to talk about is Muhammad Ali. Long name was Muhammad Ali Pasha. He was an Albanian, and he essentially ruled over Egypt while they were technically a part of the Ottoman Empire. One of the big things that you see during this time period is nationalism. All right, the Ottoman Empire is a big multi-ethnic empire. The elites in Turkey were Turks, but everybody else, came from different nationalities, from different ethnicities. And just how nationalism was sweeping through Europe during this time period, it was also sweeping through the Ottoman Empire. So Egypt, even though it will remain technically a part of the Ottoman Empire all the way up, till the mid to late 1800s, really they had lost control of it long before. And the first guy that really starts more or less self-governing in that territory is Muhammad Ali. Now, he makes a bunch of changes, some of them good, some of them bad. You can kind of decide what goes where. He did create a large standing army, a conscripted military. He does conquer some additional territory, some of it for the Ottomans, some of it without their permission. He did establish a new network of schools. He established a newspaper, which was the first for the area. He did take over agricultural production. The government took over agricultural production in Egypt, specifically the crops of cotton and wheat, which historically had been, two of Egypt's biggest exports. But the big thing that you need to remember, and I'd put a star next to this, he is the one that initiates industrialization. Okay, while the rest of the Ottoman Empire is just kind of doing their thing, he sees what the Europeans are doing. He sees that they're starting to really thrive, first in the textile industry, later in others. And he says, hey, we've got cotton, we've got resources, we should do the same. So the big thing about him, maybe some stars next to this, he starts kind of a state-sponsored phase of industrialization. And being able to specialize in cotton textiles, that's one of the things that really starts to modernize the nation. They're one of the first territories of the Ottoman Empire that really pushes towards modernization. And part of that is because even though they were part of the Ottoman Empire, they kind of did their own thing for many, many years. So Muhammad Ali, the big thing, and I put this under positive, really initiates state-sponsored industrialization. Specifically the cotton industry, cotton textiles. Now, later on, during a big age of new imperialism, Africa pretty much gets taken over by Western European powers. All right, Egypt is included in that. At one point, it was kind of part of France. Later on, more or less was ran by Great Britain. But even the British, they kept Muhammad Ali's descendants in power. And as you read the other day, his descendants will rule over Egypt until 1952, either completely independently or kind of under the guidance of the British. For Muhammad Ali, I'd give him the nickname, and they say this, he's basically the father of modern Egypt. And again, a lot of that has to do with him being one of the first to really sponsor industrialization there. You'll see to a limited extent this happen in China. This definitely happens in Japan. As these different areas see that they need to catch up, the state kind of initiates, the state being the government, initiates a lot of industrialization efforts. After a while, the Ottoman Empire as a whole kind of saw that changes were needed. That's what Tanzimat was, your next little vocab. This was a reorganization of the government, of society. They tried to root out corruption. They tried to make things a little bit more secular, non-religious. They reformed the education code. They rebuilt or built up their infrastructure, in part with foreign investment, building roads, canals, and railroads. They reformed the legal system. But some of these reforms, especially in law, actually made things more patriarchal in the Ottoman Empire. Because under Islam, at least during these days, women had considerably more rights than you would see in a lot of territories around the world. And as things got more modernized and more secularized, aka less religious, women kind of lost more and more of their social standing. The Ottomans lose a lot of land during this time period. And you can kind of see, just on the map, they lose more or less Egypt, even though Egypt was still a part of them. They were ruling themselves. A lot of the rest of northern Africa, you do see kind of come under the I don't know, protection of the French, later other European nations. Later on, like we'd said, the Balkans, areas like Bulgaria, even before that, Greece, Serbia, they started to gain their independence as well. By the time you get to the 20th century, man, really the Ottoman Empire is just in Asia. Used to be in Africa and Europe as well, but they had definitely shrunken to a great degree. It's one of the reasons they get that nickname, the sick man of Europe, because at a certain point, as Western European nations are on the rise, they're on the slow but steady decline. Now, why did this happen? A couple basic things. First, European influence. The Europeans were getting more powerful. They were getting wealthier. Again, a lot of that has to do with industrialization. And that gave them the power to kind of assist, liberation movements in Eastern Europe, in North Africa. But the bigger force is just nationalism in general. Again, the 1800s and early 1900s is a time period of great nationalism. We talked about it. Different groups of people wanting to be self-governing, wanting nations of their own. We had said nationalism. On one hand, it's kind of an extreme form of patriotism in countries that already are well established, but especially in these large multi-ethnic empires, it's these different groups within those empires wanting to break away, wanting to do their own thing. And that's why they lose all the things that they do. Now, the last term you were supposed to look up was extraterritoriality. During this time period, Europeans are exerting a lot of pressure on just about everybody around the world. We're going to get into that next week. Well, the Ottomans, because they had kind of fallen behind and they do want to more rapidly modernize and build up, their infrastructure, they start accepting more and more foreign investment. One of the groups that comes in to help them build their railroads is the Germans, the brand new country of Germany, which, was an early country that industrializes. So the Germans come in, they're investing a lot of money, they're helping out, but they get certain advantages because of that. One of them is the concept of extraterritoriality. That's the idea that say, hey, for example, the Germans that are in the Ottoman Empire, living there, working there, they don't have to follow the Ottomans' laws. They follow Germany's laws. So in this case, Germans could come in, do something that technically was against the law in the Ottoman Empire, something that may get you fined or imprisoned or maybe even executed, and they wouldn't be held accountable if it wasn't against German law. And even if it was against German law, they'd probably be tried back in Germany and let off the hook. You're going to see extraterritoriality moving forward, especially in situations where European nations go to areas and don't outright colonize them, but they pretty much take over informally using their economic strength. You're going to see this a lot in China if you haven't gotten to that point yet. But extraterritoriality is just one of the kind of weird things that's going to increase tension leading all the way up to World War I. Also, World War I, just a little connection here. Germany helps invest in the Ottoman Empire. World War I, what do you know? They're on the same side. A lot of the relationships that were built during this time period, they do carry over into the 20th century, into World War I, and so on and so forth. So that's the short and sweet of it with the Ottomans. Again, just to review, they had fallen a little bit behind. Nationalism, lack of modernization, the conflict between, trying to be more modern and trying to be more traditional, and the rise of Europe is one of the things that led to them shrinking to a very small extent during this time. For the remainder of the day, you got to finish your notes. You are going to be reading about the Qing dynasty, aka the Manchu, the last Chinese dynasty. They had kind of isolated themselves prior to this time period. Another group that kind of isolated themselves, but definitely has a different response to growing European influence is Japan. So today, if you will, just kind of go back to this slide. I'm going to put it up on the screen, once I exit off my computer. Again, try to get these notes done today. We will talk about this, but I'm not going to talk about every single thing. So you can't necessarily rely on me going over everything that's going to be on here tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're going to watch some videos. We're going to stop. We'll look at some maps. We'll kind of talk about the majority of this. And hopefully you'll have a good understanding at the end of tomorrow of how these different territories reacted to the Industrial Revolution that went on elsewhere. If you finish up early, check your grades. I updated all grades yesterday. Everything should be in, unless you turned it in after school yesterday or at the very, very end. So check your grades. If you see a 0 and you're like, man, I turned that in, come and talk to me. That happens sometimes. I mean, mistakes happen. I'm just a man. I'm going to make mistakes. But check that stuff out. And if you owe me stuff and you know you owe me stuff, work on it. Get your notes done quickly, hopefully. And then use whatever time's left to hopefully get caught up. Again, I'm going to be up here. If you want to listen to your headphones, you can. If you need anything, please let me know. Yes.